Oprah.
I know, I love it. I need that everywhere I go.
Right? Hi, everybody.
Hello, hi.
Listen, you have so much enthusiasm in the
amazing.
afternoon. This is amazing. So welcome to this session on, we're going to talk about confronting and even preventing conflict. My name is Mike Runglin. I work on the learning and development team at Facebook, so I actually work for Facebook, where I've been for a little over 6 years now. And this topic is near and dear to me. I talk a lot about managing conflict in healthy ways internally at Facebook, so really excited to have a chance to meet so many of you as I did last night and earlier today to talk about conflict in your groups. How many of you have had a conflict in your group in the last 24 hours?
Oh, wow.
No? You didn't have any for a whole day. So most of you have. So we're going to talk a little bit about some ideas to help you frame how you think about conflict, and then we're going to talk about ways to prevent it, and then we're going to do a little bit of a group discussion to hear from you and to give you guys an opportunity to kind of coach and give each other feedback. So I'm Mike. This is Carrie. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm Carrie Jones. I am the founding partner and COO of a company called CMX, and we help businesses build brand communities, and we train community managers how to do their work.
And we're also joined by James Lancaster, who works on the groups team at Facebook. He's going to come up a little bit later when we open it up for discussion. So welcome, James, and welcome to all of you to the session. So here's a couple things that we're going to talk about for the next 47 and a half minutes. First, kind of understanding what some of the different sources of conflict are, where it comes from, how it starts in us, and how it spreads to other people, and vice versa. How to stop conflict before it begins. Like I mentioned, Carrie's going to talk you through some of the things that you can do, best practices that you can do as leaders of groups to prevent conflict from happening in the first place. And then, as I said, we're going to have some time to do some discussion. So one of the things that I do at Facebook is training. And one of my favorite classes to teach, I've taught it at Facebook, I taught it before Facebook, is a class called Crucial Conversations. Has anybody ever heard of the book or taken the class Crucial Conversations? We have two people. Awesome. My hope is that I will motivate and inspire you by the end of this 45 minutes together to actually pick up a copy of the book and read it. I think of all of the programs that I've taught in my career, it's probably had the most transformative effect on people in their ability to both deal with conflict internally and lead through conflict externally. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of what I do in that class, and I want you to assume that you just walked into this room, and instead of being together for 45 minutes, we're actually going to be together for a couple of days. So we're going to spend some good time together. I'm the facilitator of your program. You walk in, and I imagine that I have a whiteboard behind me, and I pick up this pen. And you think, oh, he's going to go over and write something on the board. And I look at the pen, and as I'm walking over, I do this. I think I broke it this time, for real. That poor pen has been through it today. So I want you to just, before you overthink it, how are you going to describe what I did maybe in your Facebook group or in a post or outside of the room? Don't overthink it. Just blurt it out. Temper tantrum. I'm pissed off. That was I'm trying to get attention. Did it work? Yes. Sorry? Unnecessary. What else? I'm frustrated. I snapped. Drama. Yeah, it's out of ink. She's my glass half full. We always, it was the pen's fault that it got thrown mercilessly against the wall. So here's the thing, and this is the third group that we've had today, and I've done this little demo activity for thousands of people in my career. And there have only been a couple of people out of those thousands of people that answered when I asked, how are you going to describe what happened, that actually say, you threw a pen. I got all of you. You did it. So the reason that I bring that up is that the pen is kind of a metaphor for how we process life, right? And one of the things that I love from Crucial is this graphic. It's called the path to action. The path to action basically shows for everything that you see and hear, and in this case, what you saw me do was throw a pen, Before you do anything, the very first thing that your brain is going to do on its own is tell a story about why you think it happened. So some of your stories were pretty simple. The pen's out of ink. Thank you for giving me the benefit of the doubt. Some of you were like, drama. This person's trying to get attention, or I'm unhinged, or I'm crazy, or whatever, right? Saw the same thing, saw me throw the pen. Everybody tells a different story. Why? What are our stories based on? Experience. If your experience is mine, and I've taught thousands of classes in my career, when I see an instructor lose it like that, I'm in, right? I want the class to last a year, because that's something to me, something's interesting is going to happen. To the rest of you who don't do what I do for a living, you might feel what? You might be scared, right? Like, especially if you were in the path of the pen, you might be like, what else is going to fly in this classroom, right? You might be scared, you might be intimidated, you might be worried about what's going to happen. Most of you, when it comes to action, will probably shut down, right? Most of you are probably not going to eagerly contribute to class discussions if pen throwing is in the mix, right? The thing that I want to point out about this is that the action is not, and the feeling is not based on what you saw. The feeling and the action is based on the story that you told yourself about it. How many of you have ever seen a thread in one of your groups where somebody posts either a post or a comment that pushes all of your buttons? Me too, right? All of our buttons are different, right? It's the reason why I might be able to see a post that Carrie thinks is just completely over the top and inappropriate, and I can look at it and be like, what's the big deal? Because my buttons are different, my story is different, and the way that I feel and act is going to be different. I don't want you to not tell yourself stories about the things that you see and hear. They can be really useful. If you leave tonight, say you go for a walk late this evening, you can't sleep because you're so excited about this, and you walk outside of your hotel and you see it's late at night and you see somebody across the street with like a ski mask on and holding something that looks weaponish, I don't want you to be like, okay, Mike told me not to tell stories. Now get the hell out of there. Run, right? Our brain doesn't know the difference between that person in the ski mask with the weapon and somebody that's posting a comment that pushes all of our buttons. Our brain doesn't know the difference. When we perceive a threat, whether it's emotional or physical or mental, we go into fight or flight mode. Whether you fight or whether you flee is going to depend on the story that you told yourself and the emotional response that you had to it. Here's the other thing about this that's really important to keep in mind. Everybody else is doing this too. So say what you see and hear is I post something in your group and I'm being kind of a jerk. And the story that you tell yourself is Mike is a jerk, he doesn't care about this group, he wants to start problems. That makes me upset, and so I'm going to comment on Mike's post, you're a jerk, I can't believe that you're doing this. As soon as you do that, I see and hear that you're calling me a jerk. And so then I tell myself a story about why you did it, and then I feel, do you see the spiral that we're going to go down together? Now, again, the point of this is not to tell you, don't ever tell yourself stories, don't ever have emotional responses, but to know when it's happening. Because especially, you guys are admins, you're leaders. So if you give into your story and into the emotion that comes from that story by behaving in ways that reflect it, you're just inviting other people to do the same thing. So be mindful of the fact that everything that you see and hear, storytelling mode. How many of you stopped yourself after I threw the pen and said, okay, let me tell myself a quick story about, right? Nobody does it. It happens automatically. So being aware that it's happening in other people will hopefully give you some relief to say, okay, my buttons are being pushed right now. If I don't stop myself and kind of take a deep breath, which we're going to talk about how to prevent conflict in a second, I might unwittingly contribute to the conflict and make it bigger. How many of you have ever made a conflict bigger? Right? You're among friends, you can admit it. I've done it too. But understanding this, and again, if you have not read this book, I highly recommend it. But knowing that this happens will hopefully give you some sense of like, where is this coming from and why are we all so emotional? It's generally not about the thing that was said. It was about the stories that were told that informed the emotions. Does that make sense? Cool. So Carrie is going to talk a little bit now about what are some of the things that you as group admins can do to set norms and rules and guidelines and philosophies to help stop conflict before it begins. So take it away, Carrie.
Thank you, Mike. So as Mike said, I'm going to be talking about how to stop conflict before it begins, and that might seem a little optimistic, right? Because in any group, I've actually read all of your group bios, and some of the stuff that you're dealing with and the space that you're holding is extremely vulnerable. And in any type of space, no matter how vulnerable it is or non-vulnerable, there's always going to be conflict. So I don't want to make light of that. You always have to have the reactive with the proactive. But what I'm going to help you do is create a long-term strategy so that you can start to step back from it and then create success in your community long-term. So I've been building communities and in communities for the last 12 years, and I've studied communities and researched them, thousands of them. And from my research, what I found are 5 key attributes that communities with strong core cultures have, and these attributes contribute to a resilient culture that even when conflict does break out, it doesn't topple down the entire structure. And not only that, but it helps you, again, not burn out, which is really important for the life of your community. So let's get you there. The first thing that these types of communities do is they create and share guiding principles. These are simply your vision, mission, and core values of your community. So I'm not going to talk about the how of that. You might have already been through some sessions about leadership. There's going to be workshops on that. All I want to say about this is that these guiding principles should be public facing. So where do they live if they're public facing? They actually live in your community guidelines. So just like I read all the group bios, I also read many of your community guidelines, at least the ones I could get my hands on. And I think most of you actually are about 90% there. But what I hear time and time again, not only among this group, but among Reddit managers and different other community managers, is that they say no one is reading my guidelines. But that's not my problem, that's their problem. But actually, when it becomes their problem, it's also your problem, because then your job just becomes reactive. You're banning people all the time. There's no core culture that's running through this. So it's really, really important that you make your guidelines be successful. So how do you do that? The core thing here to remember is that your guidelines should communicate confidence. And the analogy that I like to use here is that you should think about yourself writing these as a real estate agent. So real estate agents, if you're looking at a fixer-upper or a really small house, and they're not going to show you basically the broken bathroom in the back first, right? What they're going to do is they're going to walk up the driveway with you, and they're going to tell you a story about what this place could be if we all work together. Now I'm talking about communities. If we all work together and create this space together and make it a home. Your community is a home for many people. So it needs to start with the positive, be written in the affirmative, use it to reinforce the positive actions and not just to punish people for doing negative actions in your community. And finally, end with the consequences and clear-cut rules. So yes, you still need those rules, but it shouldn't be a whole laundry list of rules thrown at people right off the bat, because they won't stick around to read the guidelines. The next thing that these strong communities do is they empower their moderators. So you may or may not have moderators and co-admins right now, but as you grow, it becomes really, really important to scaling this culture. It's integral. So how do you do this effectively? So there are 3 golden rules for creating moderator programs. I see this in all the best-in-class communities. They have a moderator playbook, and that's something that they're able to, whether it's video or it's a document that's just very simple, they're able to show this to new moderators so that there's standards. And usually it includes things like an escalation plan. And I actually saw one posted in the Power Admins group this morning, this really intricate escalation plan for what to do if conflict does occur, and I was just swooning over it. The second thing that you need to do is make moderators earn the privilege to be moderators. It is not a right, it is a privilege. I will say that in my years building communities, I have never worked with a moderator who I haven't at least talked to multiple times so that I know personal details about their lives, like what their pets' names are, or what they do for fun on the weekends. And that's key to building trust with those moderators. So it's not just a transactional relationship you have with them, you're actually building a long-term relationship with them. And finally, thank them profusely. If you have great moderators today, you might know that it was hard to get them and it's very hard to keep them. Moderators actually burn out at a rate that's faster than community leaders. It's because their work is often invisible. They don't get credit. So how can you, as the leader of this community, find ways to make these people feel appreciated? Is it a handwritten note? Is it you flying out to visit them once a year if you can afford it? Or is it simply you sending them a Facebook message and saying, hey, I really appreciate you going on this journey with me. People don't hear that enough. So you can bring a lot of brightness to their day, and that will keep them around if they can stick around with you. I also actually, to go back, I wanted to share an example of what can go wrong here. So how many of you have heard of the community dig.com? Anybody? Early 2000s, online, yes. So basically, dig.com was a place where you could go and you could comment on all kinds of news articles. And the culture was a little bit toxic, just people kind of attacking each other. And they did have moderators. They were outsourced moderators. And they had all these top members. And there were multiple revolts among these members and the moderators. And there were about 4 of them that made the headlines on TechCrunch and all these tech publications. And finally what happened was Dig released some major product overhauls and did not consult the community on them. And then all these people decided to just say, peace out, I'm going to Reddit. And that's actually why Reddit, that's how they seeded that community and made it as strong as it is. They were Dig users. So I do not want that to happen in any of your communities. So that's why moderator strategy and the other things I've spoken about are so, so important. The other thing that these communities with strong core cultures have in common is they seek ongoing proactive feedback. Why is this so key? Because it creates a container for conflict. In online communities, what happens is people feel like they're not being heard or seen when they're making comments, and there's no place for them to go to share their feedback. So if you put out a regular survey and have an always open anonymous reporting form in your community, people will have a place that they know that they're going to be heard. So we actually have an employee at CMX. Her name is Katie, and she used to build community for a company called Noonday Collection, and they released one of these always open anonymous reporting forms. And yes, reports did go up. You will hear negative feedback, but it was happening before, just nobody was sharing it with you. So it's better to have the container for it. And I also know how hard it is to read this stuff, because when I look at CMX's surveys, I kind of like look askance. I can't look directly at the screen. But I will say that we've gotten our very best ideas from our community members. And it's important that we thank them and report back to them the changes that we're making. That is the physical process of creating trust in an online community, saying, I will take in your feedback, I will make changes, and I will give you credit. And then that cycle continues. It's really, really powerful. And finally, but not least importantly, take care of yourself. My first job building community professionally, I was working 24 hours a day. The community ballooned up to 20,000 people all over the world, speaking different languages from different cultures. And I found myself just completely overwhelmed. And I actually had to take medical leave from my job. And since then, I made it one of my single-minded focuses to make sure that other people know that they are worthy of taking care of themselves, that you are as deserving of care and attention as anyone else in your community is. And that's something that's really easy to forget when you have all these voices coming at you. So these are tips I'd like to share with you from my own experience. I'm not a medical professional, I will say that. But this is what's worked for me. So today, all around you, you have people who understand why you spend so much time on Facebook. And you might not always have that in your life. Like my family doesn't understand it at all. So your neighbors here in this room, you can Facebook message them if they give you permission and say, can I get a gut check on this? That can be really, really powerful. Also the Facebook Power Admins group, that's a great place to be, even if you're just a lurker, right? And having a personal mantra can also help you get through some really tough conflict situations. So mine, I will share with you, is this is not mine to take on. And I don't mean that in the way that I'm not going to respond to this. I simply mean it in that I'm not going to take this person's story and make it mine, to Mike's points. I'm going to take this person's story and then decide, who am I in this situation? I'm a kind person, so I'm going to respond to this person with kindness. That's what we all need more of in this world. So finally, another thing that I just want to remind you is to take a break, take deep breaths, focus on the exhale, and continue to build amazing communities. So just to wrap all of that up, here are the 5 key attributes of a community with a strong core culture. This does not mean that you have to go home and create all these right away, but you have a roadmap now for where you can start to strengthen and optimize different pieces of your conflict management strategy. So with that, we've shared a lot of information ourselves, but we also know that all of you in this room are experts. And so we're going to open it up. Does anyone have a conflict situation right now in their minds that they would like feedback on or have questions on that you're thinking of? We have 1. Anybody else? 2? Okay, we've got enough. Cool.
Amazing.
Amazing. You're all